Hi there. I had a recent question from a reader who wanted to know if Unleashed Sheets was going to be helpful for her in her current situation or potentially confusing or problematic. She is dealing with some physical health issues and also going to counseling for some trauma therapy and healing from some trauma. So, my guess is in that situation, there are a lot of emotions that are being dealt with, and the body is probably processing, just like the brain and our spirits processing through a lot already. Unleashed Sheets can be helpful, and there I would also have some caution. So, let me explain that a little bit further. What an Unleashed Sheets does is it helps you take either an event or just your day, just kind of things that are happening in the day, and start by just writing down some things that are happening. This gets the brain process going and helps bring things to awareness when we just start writing down some of the facts. So the first section of Unleashed Sheets is writing down what's happening. So maybe you use this alongside of counseling, and you guys are working on a particular issue, and you could use the Unleashed Sheets to say, okay, well, today my counselor and I talked about this, or this event came up and I'm still dealing with a lot of the emotion. I feel kind of stuck in it. I feel overwhelmed. Well, feelings would be the next third section on there. So basically you would start off by writing kind of what was happening. You had this conversation, it had this outcome for you, those types of things. The next section would be I'm thinking. Then you would identify and write down the actual thoughts that you're having. So maybe it was, I can't believe my counselor asked that question, or I'm terrified to respond to this. That's a really a deeper, honest response that you may not even get to in counseling, but by writing it down between you and God, you might be able to write it down, or at least write a little note about what that thought is, trying to start getting it out of you. God already knows it, and you can destroy this when you're done. But after those thoughts, then you're going to have an opportunity to identify the feelings that you're feeling. My guess is that in a counseling session, you may be working on identifying some feelings, and it may or may not be challenging to even know what those are. And whether or not you are identifying feelings, this tool will have 2 pages of feeling words, which is usually, in my experiences with counseling, the feeling words list and the soul words list are fairly minimal. They can be very helpful, and it's good to have that simple structure for counseling sessions. This resource with the 2 pages gives more vocabulary to describe the experience a little bit more. And sometimes I've heard this from other people, and I've experienced it myself, that some of those words just kind of make something kind of click, like, oh, yes, that describes what it is. Something was kind of bugging me. I know I'm having this kind of feeling, but this description helps me understand it and make peace with it a little bit better. And so that process actually can help the brain and the body work through some of those challenging thoughts and emotions and bring awareness. Then you're asking yourself to, you're making space to be intentional with God and receive from Him. And so in a heightened physiological response, this is not a counseling perspective. I'm just about to start grad school for my master's in counseling, but also based on personal experience, it can be hard to get through those first steps if you are dealing with a lot of challenging emotions and the trauma is hot at the surface already. In those cases, I highly recommend, I do believe the tool can be very useful, but I recommend letting your counselor know, showing them the printout of what that is, and asking them to guide you to make sure that you have a couple of safety measures put in place. What does it look like for you to be able to stay grounded, to stay present, to recoup when the emotions are intense? What is your safety plan to keep you from having an overly exhaustive emotional experience? I think that could be really, really beneficial. But I would include, just like you might, maybe for supplements that could be really helpful for our bodies, if we have a quality doctor and they have an understanding of that, just assuming they have that understanding, we might ask them to kind of incorporate, how does this interact with the rest of a regimen that I might need from a doctor, for example. Doing this particular process, so there's more that happens on the second page, which is kind of acknowledging what's going on. It's scripture, it's time in scripture. You have the freedom to skip sections that are too hard, to take time to go through it. There are are seasons where the emotions are so strongly triggered in myself that it may take me 2 or 3 days to complete one usage of this sheet because it is so intense that my brain kind of stops working and I need to feel some of those emotions and kind of move on and give my brain and my body rest so that I am able to process the rest of it because it is really intense. So I give myself the grace to say, I can step back. I'm going to get a little bit out. I'm going to come back to this and try again later and just actually take a nap if need be, or do it on a fresh morning, something like that. Or take a break. And if I have a trusted friend that I can talk to and work through some of the things that I'm processing, or something like Celebrate Recovery, something like that. So on the second page is the acknowledging, and then also just kind of, writing down some things of gratitude, but giving and receiving. This process I call the great exchange, where you're giving and receiving to God. You may or may not do one or both of those, but the process of just sitting there before God and saying, I give to you the truth that I'm really struggling right now. Or, and then asking God, what do you have for me? And that's kind of a vulnerable place to be, to ask, what do you want me to receive from you? I believe that those steps can be super powerful because what they do is they engage our hearts and minds with God, give us an opportunity to experience some of the emotions that may be shoved down. But I do have caution, if those emotions are heightened, that you want to have a safety plan in place for recovery. So for me, that looks like some things with deep breathing and even I forget what my therapist called this, but it's like hugging yourself, and it's a tapping procedure to let the physiological components of my body and my brain settle down enough to recognize I'm not in danger right now. And God's presence is with me. And then when I get into that space of the spiritual aspect of it, asking God to speak and just writing down whatever comes to mind, sometimes what comes out is nothing. And sometimes it's just indicative that there's just so much turmoil going on. Maybe I can't really hear very well, but more often than not, it may be just a word or a scripture that comes to mind, or something that seems a little like it doesn't really make sense. But then later in the week, something will happen, and I'm like, oh my word, I made space to hear from God, and He is showing me something. I wasn't sure what it meant, and I just don't necessarily need to know the full meaning of it, but the fact that there was some kind of correlation later was meaningful and impactful to me, that actually helped me experience His love for me at a deeper level, because what He was showing and revealing was loving, if that makes sense. So that is my response, which is probably not a super clear response. I do believe that the Unleashed sheets can be helpful, greatly helpful, when you're working through challenging situations, healing hurts. So I believe that they're helpful for unhealed wounds, unconfessed sins, that like things that we don't even maybe remember that need to kind of surface, unhealthy belief systems, identifying the things that we're actually believing, even if we know what they are, but experiencing them more at a heart level, so that it becomes more transparent, transformative, I'm sorry. And, but again, like I said, if there's the heightened emotions, I do caution to go ahead and work with a counselor. I think it's a fantastic resource to use alongside of coaching and counseling. I use them with my coaching clients, and, I may be using them with my counseling clients, depending on how all that goes in the next few years. But if you have further questions on it, please let me know. I know that it seems it's new. Unleashed Sheets is kind of something different, and there isn't something else like this to compare it to. It's not necessarily a journal. It's not a book. It's what is this resource? What is this tool? But the process is something that is very beneficial and can be used in a number of different circumstances. So I'd love to help answer your questions if you have any. Take care.